The first night I heard the sound, I thought it was just the pipes. My apartment was old, the kind of place where the walls creak at night and the plumbing groans like something alive is moving inside it. The only reason I lived there was because it was cheap. The kitchen was small, barely big enough for the fridge, stove, and sink, but it was clean. A single yellow light hung above the sink, and the refrigerator hummed constantly, filling the silence of the apartment. The first strange thing happened at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I woke up suddenly to a small metallic sound. Clink. At first I thought I imagined it, but then it happened again. Clink. It sounded like someone tapping a spoon gently against a glass. I sat up in bed and stared toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. The apartment was completely silent except for the humming refrigerator. I told myself it was just the pipes, or maybe something settling in the cabinets. Still, curiosity got the better of me. I got out of bed and walked slowly down the hallway. The wooden floor creaked under my feet as I approached the kitchen. The light above the sink was still on. Everything looked normal. The sink was empty, the drawers were closed, and nothing seemed out of place. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling stupid for getting up in the middle of the night over nothing. Then I went back to bed. The next night it happened again. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the same sound echoed through the apartment. Clink. This time it was louder. I froze under the blanket and listened. A few seconds later it came again. Clink. The sound was definitely coming from the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, slowly walking down the hallway. As soon as I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed something strange. There was a smell in the air. At first I couldn't place it, but then I realized what it reminded me of. Burnt meat. Not like burnt toast or burnt food, but something heavier and more unpleasant. I looked at the stove, but it was off. The sink was empty again. I opened the trash can, but there was nothing unusual inside. Then I heard another sound. Scrape. It came from the cabinet under the sink. Something inside was moving very slowly. My heart began to beat faster. I tried to convince myself it was just a rat or some other animal that had gotten inside the apartment. Old buildings always had problems like that. Taking a deep breath, I crouched down and slowly opened the cabinet door. Inside were only cleaning supplies and a sponge, nothing else. But the smell of burnt meat suddenly became stronger. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I quickly closed the cabinet and stepped back. The light above the sink flickered once. For a split second, I saw something in the reflection of the microwave door behind me, a tall shape standing in the kitchen, its head almost touching the ceiling. My entire body froze. I turned around instantly, but the kitchen was empty. Nothing was there. That was the first time I considered moving out, but rent in the city was expensive, and I told myself it had to be stress or lack of sleep. People hallucinate when they're tired. That explanation felt easier to accept than anything else. But the third night proved something was very wrong. I decided to stay awake and see what would happen. I sat on the couch watching the clock on my phone. 2:10 a.m., 2:11, 2:12. The apartment felt colder than usual, and the silence felt heavy. When the clock reached 2:17, the sound came again. But this time it wasn't just one sound. Clink, 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 clink. It sounded like dozens of utensils hitting each other. My heart started pounding in my chest. Slowly, I walked toward the kitchen again. When I reached the doorway, I stopped. The kitchen looked completely different. Every drawer was open. Forks, knives, and spoons were scattered across the counter like someone had been digging through them. I stepped inside carefully. The smell of burnt meat was stronger than ever now. Then I noticed the stove. One of the burners was on, and a small blue flame flickered quietly. I knew I hadn't turned it on. My eyes moved across the counter, and then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A single spoon was standing upright in the middle of the counter, perfectly balanced, as if someone had placed it there. I stared at it for several seconds without moving. Then the spoon slowly tipped over and fell. Clink. At that exact moment, I heard something whisper behind me. The voice was quiet and wet, like someone speaking through a mouth filled with liquid. It said only one word. Hungry. Every muscle in my body locked in place. I turned around slowly. At first, the kitchen looked empty again. Then I noticed the cabinet under the sink was slowly opening on its own. The darkness inside the cabinet looked deeper than it should have been. Then something crawled out of it. At first, I thought it was a person, but the way it moved was wrong. Its arms were far too long and its back bent at a strange angle. Its skin looked burned, black and cracked like charcoal. When it lifted its head, I saw its mouth open wider than any human mouth should open. Inside its mouth were dozens of metal utensils. Forks, spoons, and knives clattered together as it moved. The creature crawled slowly across the kitchen floor toward me. Its long fingers scraped against the tiles with a dry scratching sound. It stopped near the stove where the blue flame flickered. The smell of burnt meat filled the entire room now. The creature leaned closer to the flame as if it was warming itself. Then it slowly turned its head toward me and smiled. The utensils inside its mouth clanged together as it spoke again. Hungry. I tried to move, but my body felt frozen with fear. The creature lifted one long finger and pointed at the stove. Then it spoke again in the same wet whisper. You cook. I eat. That was the moment my body finally reacted. I turned and ran as fast as I could. I grabbed my keys from the table and ran out of the apartment without even looking back. I spent the rest of the night sitting in my car in the parking lot, too scared to go back inside. When the sun finally rose, I returned to the building with the manager. I told him everything that had happened. When we entered the apartment, the kitchen looked completely normal again. The drawers were closed, the stove was off, and the smell of burnt meat was gone. Nothing looked disturbed at all. The manager laughed and told me I probably had a nightmare, but before leaving, he said something strange that made my stomach tighten. He mentioned that the previous tenant had complained about hearing strange sounds in the kitchen late at night, too. When I asked what happened to that tenant, the manager simply shrugged and said they disappeared one day without telling anyone. Then he casually added that they left most of their kitchen utensils behind. That was enough for me. I packed my things that same day and moved out. I never wanted to see that apartment again. For a few days, everything felt normal. I convinced myself maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But 3 nights after moving out, I received a phone call from the building manager. His voice sounded uneasy. He asked me a strange question. He wanted to know if I had accidentally left something cooking in the kitchen before moving out. I told him no. There was a long silence on the phone. Then he said the neighbors had started complaining about strange noises coming from my old apartment every night at the same time. I felt my hands begin to shake as I asked what kind of noises. He said they kept hearing spoons hitting glasses at exactly 2:17 in the morning. Then his voice dropped to a whisper. He said they also heard something speaking inside the empty apartment. I asked him what it was saying. He hesitated for a moment before answering. He said the voice kept whispering the same thing over and over again. It was saying that it was still hungry, and this time there was no one left in the kitchen to cook.
The first strange thing in my kitchen started with a sound. I had just come home from work late at night, around 1:30 a.m. My apartment was quiet like always. The kitchen was small with old wooden cabinets, a sink near the window, and a dim ceiling light that flickered sometimes. I walked in to grab a glass of water when I heard a soft tap, tap, tap coming from one of the cabinets above the sink. At first I thought it was just the pipes, or maybe the wood expanding in the cold night air. Old apartments make strange noises all the time. I ignored it and poured my water. But as soon as I turned my back to leave the kitchen, the tapping started again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like something inside the cabinet was trying to get out. I slowly turned around and stared at the cabinet door. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I walked toward it and opened it carefully, expecting to see maybe a rat or something small hiding inside. But there was nothing there, just a few plates and a cup sitting quietly on the shelf. I stood there for a moment, feeling a little uneasy, then I closed the cabinet and went to bed. The next night the sound came back. This time it wasn't just tapping. It sounded like something sliding slowly across the kitchen counter. I was lying in bed when I heard it. Scrape, scrape, scrape. My heart started beating faster as I got up and walked toward the kitchen. When I turned on the light, the room looked normal. Nothing had moved. But something strange caught my eye. One of the chairs at the kitchen table had been pulled out, even though I clearly remembered pushing it in earlier. For the next few days, the kitchen kept feeling stranger and stranger. Sometimes when I walked in, the cabinet doors were slightly open, even though I had closed them. Other times, I heard soft breathing sounds coming from the sink area. It felt like something was hiding there, waiting for me to leave. I started avoiding the kitchen at night, but the sounds didn't stop. Then one night around 2:40 a.m., a loud crash woke me up. It sounded like every dish in the kitchen had fallen to the floor at the same time. I rushed to the kitchen and turned on the light. Nothing was broken. Every plate was still in its place. But all the cabinets were open, every single one of them. My stomach tightened as I slowly stepped into the room. The air felt heavy and smelled slightly burnt. I began closing the cabinet doors one by one. When I reached the cabinet above the sink, I suddenly heard a whisper behind me. Hungry? The voice was quiet and dry, like something that hadn't spoken in a long time. I froze. My entire body felt numb as I slowly turned around. At first, the kitchen looked empty. Then I noticed the cabinet under the sink was slowly opening. The darkness inside looked deeper than it should have been. Then something began crawling out. Long, thin arms stretched onto the kitchen floor, followed by a tall, shadowy body. Its skin looked dark and cracked like something that had been burned. When its head lifted, I saw two pale, glowing eyes staring directly at me. The creature opened its mouth, and I heard the sound of metal clinking together. Inside its mouth were dozens of spoons and forks. It crawled slowly toward the counter and looked at the stove. Then it turned back toward me and whispered again, "You cook, we eat." That was the moment my body finally reacted. I ran out of the apartment as fast as I could without looking back. I never returned to that place. But 3 nights later, my phone rang. It was the building manager. His voice sounded nervous. He asked me if I had left something cooking in the kitchen before I moved out. I told him no. There was a long silence before he spoke again. The new tenant says every night at 2:40, the cabinets start knocking. Then he whispered something that made my blood run cold. And something inside the kitchen keeps saying it's still hungry.